On Main Street in East Hampton, if you take a right turn between All About Blinds and Main Street Pizza, you'll find a paved path where the railroad used to cut through town. This is the entrance to the Airline State Park Trail. Pretty quickly, the trail takes you out of town, past the East Hampton Cranberry Bog and into the woods. The Airline, named for an imaginary line drawn through the air between New York and Boston, was a railroad built in the 1860s and 70s to create a faster, more direct route between the two cities. As you ride the Airline Trail out of East Hampton, you'll see big rock faces rising up on either side of you, and then steep hillsides falling down away from the path. About 3 miles out of town, the trees kind of fall away, and you're up on top of this big ridge with Dickinson Creek more than 100 feet below you. You're actually on top of an old metal train trestle called the Lyman Viaduct. The metal viaduct was 137 feet high and over 1,000 feet long back in the heyday of the railroad. The trestle was filled in with sand and gravel to support heavier freight trains, so you can't see the old trestle anymore, but it's pretty amazing to think about how they had to engineer the landscape more than 150 years ago to accommodate the railroad. Most river valleys in Connecticut run north to south. So to cross the landscape as it existed, you'd have to be constantly going up and down hills. But trains need a relatively flat grade, so they had to blast through rocky ridges and then either fill or build bridges to cross the valleys. Passenger service on the airline ended in the 1930s, and the entire rail line was eventually abandoned in the 1960s. The old railbed was reclaimed and converted into a state park. Passes through forests and wetlands, and even with the sound that your tires make on the gravel trail and the wind rushing past your ears, you can still hear the sounds of songbirds in the trees. As I passed through the Raymond Brook Marsh in Hebron, there was a snapping turtle in the middle of the trail. I stopped to take a picture, and I'm glad I did, because all of a sudden I could hear all these frogs out in the marsh that I couldn't hear while I was riding. While the trail does curve in a few places, it goes up and down to meet the road crossings. In most places, it's so straight and flat that, while you're standing still, you can't tell whether the trail ahead of you is climbing or descending. The only way you can really perceive if you're going uphill or downhill is by how hard you have to pedal. A workout tracking app on my phone shows that in the first 5 miles out of East Hampton, you're going mostly downhill as you ride through Colchester. And then the next 10 miles climb about 500 feet into Hebron before descending back down through Lebanon, past a bunch of cows that seemed a lot less interested in me than I was in them, and then on into Willimantic. In 1884, a train on the airline could make the trip between Boston and New York in under 6 hours, which was a record at the time. Now the Acela Express, running along the coast, makes the trip in about 3.5 hours. My ride from East Hampton to Willimantic took about 2 hours to cover 20 miles. The airline trail continues another 20 miles into Pomfret, and if you detour on a few streets in Putnam, you can link back up with the trail in Thompson and ride as far as the Massachusetts border. Willimantic was the end of the line for me though, since I had a 20-mile return trip back to my car in East Hampton.